All right. Welcome back to our fifth
Hey,
episode. No, welcome back. Welcome back to the Pediatric Practice Management Media Cast. I'm here with Brandon. Brandon, say hello.
hey, Chip, how's it going, man? It's
I'm
been a
doing
while,
good.
huh?
Yeah, it's been too long. Brandon and I. This is what happens when we actually have jobs and things get in the way. And
Jobs and kids, I guess, huh?
yeah, jobs and kids. But we've got our next couple planned out. We're gonna pile them on. We're gonna have some more guests. I did make an attempt to have a guest appearance while we were both gone, but we had technical challenges in the end.
It's all
So
work in progress. All work in progress.
yes, we're all work in progress, and it gets better every time. Our subject today is going to be the topic of cultivating a practice culture, how to improve your practice culture, why that's important. And we're actually going to
Good
change.
thing because I came prepared to talk about that, so I'm glad
Yeah,
that that's the topic that you chose today.
yeah, yeah. We should make them. What someday we'll do. Someday we'll do like two-minute topics. We'll each pick 30. All right, and then we'll go through a bunch of topics. But the our format's going to change just a little bit. The video is going to go about. We'll see if this actually works out. The video is going to go about 20, 30 minutes, but the podcast is going to go on forever. And then that way, so for those of you who love the video, you need to see our pretty faces. It'll be brief and focused. But then Brandon and I are going to try and take advantage of what happens when we just chat. Sometimes some of the best conclusions that we reach come from just going back and forth, and so we're going to follow that route.
Excellent.
Uh, all right, so I'm going to begin talking about very, very quickly about practice culture and why I think it's important, what I run to, and then Brandon's got some really interesting advice that I'd like him to share. You know, one of the things about practice culture is that no matter how you define it, why you think it's important, one of the reasons I think a lot of the practices I work to avoid this topic is because it's something that's, although it may not be hard to do or difficult to create practice culture, it's very difficult to do well. And it's not something that physicians are taught in med school. It's not something that even the business-minded among us are taught in business school necessarily. It's not something that that there's a good blueprint for. And a lot of people feel like, because it's not concrete and you're making it up, they don't like to do it. They don't do it well. However, none of that, in my opinion, is an excuse to ignore it. And I think it's important because, or for a couple reasons. Number one, having every pediatric practice is a service business.
What do
And
you mean by that, Chip? What do you mean by service?
well, Brandon, when you walk into see the doctor, ignore your own practice for a second. When you go to the doctor, the way that you're treated by that practice has a profound effect on you. It determines whether you tell your friends about going to this place. It determines whether you even ever go back there again, or if you do, how much you do. And when you have a good, positive experience with your doctor, you tell your friends. You are more willing to work with them. If they call you up because there's a billing question, you're happy to help them versus fighting with them. And when you apply this, then, Brandon, sitting in your shoes to your pediatric practice, you know that you're delivering a service to them, and the better experience your patients have, the easier it is to work with those patients. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree. I agree. So how does the service then? How does that tie into the culture then?
Well, I'm a really big believer in the concept that you create a culture in your practice that determines how you treat your patients. I've walked into literally hundreds of pediatric practices around the country, and in about 30 seconds, I can tell whether or not this is a practice I want to work with. And sometimes it takes even less. If I walk into a practice and I'm greeted nicely, or I'm asked if I can be helped, I know that practice, consciously or subconsciously, has created a culture that makes them friendly and easy to work with. And that culture starts at the top. If I walk into a practice, and this happens to me far too often, where I'll walk into a practice and there's a front desk window and that window is closed, even if it's in the middle of hours, and I have to stand in front of that window for a minute or two, and I've got someone looking down and typing, and she knows I'm there, and then she open up the window and say, "Can I help you?" Because clearly I'm not a patient, and I'll say, "Yeah, I've got a meeting with Dr. Betancourt." oh, just a minute, and the door closes, and she sits there and doesn't do anything for a minute, and then goes off. Well, that's your practice culture right there, and your patients see that. I mean, you know this.
Yeah. So I like what you said about it comes from the top. What do you mean by that?
Well, I really believe that the way that the physicians treat the staff and the expectations the physicians have of the staff are echoed by the way that the staff treat the patients and the expectations the staff has of the patients.
So are you saying that if the doctor's a jerk, then the employees are jerks too?
9 times out of 10, absolutely. And if the doctors are nice, now being nice doesn't mean being a pushover. Being nice doesn't mean that you aren't professional. But I absolutely believe that if you treat your staff with respect, your staff will, or is more likely anyway, to treat your patients with respect. And if I see in a larger practice, if I see that you have some physicians who are good about treating the staff and other physicians who are not, and that malbehavior, let's call it, that misbehavior is accepted by the other physicians, then it becomes accepted by the staff to not perform properly. I mean, I don't know if you see that in your practice.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm in agreement with you. And I was just, asking these questions. This reminds me, two things reminds me of this. There's I don't know if this is a joke or a story. I don't know where I saw it, somewhere on the internet where it was more in the context of dating. So they said that when you go out, see how that other person, whether it's a woman or a guy, how they treat when you're going out to dinner, how they treat the waiting staff, and then that's how you'll have a good idea on how that person is, because they'll be really nice to you, to the date, and they'll be pulling all the stops. But then when you see them how they treat the waiting staff, then that's who you know what their essence is.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I believe that 100%.
So I think that applies there too. So this is another thing where you can see, well, the doctor's really nice to the patients, but if they're not that great to the staff or treats them poorly, then you'll see the true essence of that practice, even though they're putting on a good front to the patients. And the thing about coming from the top, this is a lesson that I learned clearly, or it became apparent for me. I've told this story a million times, which is my JetBlue story that I've given in a few talks. And in fact, I just at a guest post that I did for Fierce Practice Management, I talked about this. But there was something else, another lesson within that. I did that in the context of service and of marketing when I tell this lesson, but this lesson that I had. But so real brief, if you haven't heard it, I went up to the my bag was too big, and when I got to the galley area, I had to check the bag, and the guy, the flight attendant, was already checking other bags, but he was putting the final destinations and the flight numbers and final destination on napkins, and he was placing them on the other bags. And I must have had a face of like, what the heck are you doing? Because he immediately said, no, don't worry, I just don't have enough tags here. Once I finish here, then I'll go ahead and tag him, and then we'll take him down to the jetway. So the captain was right next to us because we were there in the galley, and he had the door open, and he jumped out of his chair, and he told the flight attendant, I'll be right back, I'll go get the tags for you. And he went up, and I don't know, something like 20 seconds later, he was back with a handful of tags, and then he gave them to the flight attendant. And I remember thinking several things. One was this whole customer service thing, this whole marketing thing that I talk about. But the other thing is that type of behavior does not happen from a captain to a flight attendant if the captain has not seen that behavior by his superior or from the top. Generally, so it comes down from the top. And I remember seeing that if I want to, the best way to get your employees to do, to mimic any type of behavior is if you're doing the type of behavior. And this actually goes for parenting as well. It's like, look, kids, look how I'm being nice to these people. Or look, kids, this is what we're doing. Like making a big deal about the proper behavior. So not only your kids but your employees also know what is expected of them. Yeah,
and there are two key elements to your story that I want to highlight. Number one, the first one is the obvious one. It's the one that I think everyone picks up on right away, which is you've now how many times you've told this JetBlue story? Hundreds to thousands of people have heard it. JetBlue scored scored more advertising points with this little act by the captain than any ad they could have run at the Super Bowl or anything like that. I mean, already with just from you. But there's another key element to, and this is a big piece about why I think company culture is important, and that has to do with the concept of teamwork. When you are trying to, whether you're delivering a product or a service, but particularly with a service, you have an organization. Now, Brandon, you know how many people in your office? How many people do you employ entirely?
10.
Okay, so you have 10, which is a small practice.
Yeah.
PCC has 50. JetBlue probably has 5,000 or 10,000 or something like that. The more people you manage, and when you're at 10, you're already well across the line. The more people you have to manage, the harder it is to get them all working in parallel lines where they all have a common goal, a consistent goal. And you've already run into this, I know, in your practice, we work with you, where you have to start doing things like having job descriptions and provide detailed breakdowns of everything you expect from these people. And the problem is, no matter how great you are at doing that, there are too many instances every day where something isn't perfectly defined in a job description, or you're not there to oversee them. And so you have to rely on people to make decisions on behalf of your practice about what to do in their jobs. And if you don't have a well-defined corporate culture, in particularly, or I should say, if you don't have a positive corporate culture, there are many corporate cultures that are negative, all right? If you don't have a well-defined corporate culture, you leave your staff the ability to make decisions that may not be completely in sync with what you expect. And I've worked with many practices, too many practices, where the staff has been so beaten up and so harried and so yelled at that they don't make any decisions whatsoever. In fact, they often do nothing because they just sit there and they don't do anything unless they're told exactly what to do. And that's the worst case scenario. If you have a good, positive corporate culture, it makes your entire practice more efficient and more effective because everyone's aimed at the same target. If you have a front desk person who understands philosophically or from a cultural perspective how you're supposed to treat the patients, you don't have to outline how they're supposed to respond to the 10,000 different options that or stories that present to them every day. If your people if they know how to behave, if you have expectations of them that they understand, your job is a lot easier.
So what would you say to give them, so how would you say would be the best way to give them some notion on how to behave in certain circumstances? Certainly you're saying that you can't predict every single circumstances and give them an if then that type of situation. So what would you say would be the thing that would help them make those decisions, even though if it's not clearly outlined? By the way, I didn't answer for it, but I want to hear what your perspective is.
Well, my first response would be the very one that you pointed out before, which is, as a leader in your practice, you have to you show by example. You have to show that I would my example would be, and this is within the context of PCC's culture. I have to show people all the time that, hey, I may have been employed here for the last 20 years, but that doesn't mean that I can't do certain jobs. I will take support calls. I will work on weekends. I will work at nights. I will travel at a moment's notice. Just because I may be a senior person here or not, some people might debate that, that doesn't mean that I'm above doing any of the work. And why do I work like that? Because the person who started our company, John Canning, he will do anything at any time, especially as it relates to saying yes to a customer. And when you see him do that, when he could do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. When I see him do that, I realize, oh, I know what I need to do to succeed. I know what's right. And it has this secondary impact of not only am I seeing it from, say, above, it creates a peer pressure. And that, in your practice, even though you have only 10 employees, peer pressure is an incredibly effective way of managing your practice. So if you have 8 employees who know what needs to get done, and you have 2 who don't, those 2 stick out, and if they decide to stay with you, they have to get in line or they're not there.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing. That's where I'd start. So All right. Does my answer match yours, or do you have something to add to it?
I have something completely different, which I completely agree, though, with your position. But I think that we should do away with rules and focus on like the company values. And we should hammer those values more than anything else. And that's something that we've started to focus on here at the practice, probably in the last couple of years, where we're focusing less on rules and focusing more on what the values and then pounding those values over and over and over again. So, for example, when in the way that I reinforce this is we have a value which is it's the gym value, go the extra mile, right? Go the extra mile, the gym value. And we always want to go the extra mile. And we have, deliver on surpass, our mission and our vision and how we do that. We've clearly defined those things, and we always try to do teaching moments where we're like, you see, boys and girls, this is where, we're talking about here on how we have to enforce it. So if I have a situation where, let's go say, in generally where I work the most, of course, it's like with collections or something like that. The simple question that I ask is when they don't know what to do, and I don't even know what to do, I say, what is in the best interest of the practice, okay? And that right there will dictate exactly what we need to do in the circumstances that isn't as clear. So sometimes it's in the best interest of the practice to break the rules. And other times it's like under no circumstances is this going to be good to break the rules, because it's actually going to hinder us. And if the practice is hindered, then we won't be able to provide the care. So sometimes it's in the best interest to say, you know what, I'll go ahead and fill out this form. I won't charge you. It's okay. It's a customer service. We're not going to be losing out. But, calling a prescription over the phone, there's absolutely no, because, in the long run, that's going to reflect poorly on us. So those are the situations. So by the way, when I say break the rules, I'm not necessarily saying that, nursing staff or doctors or go outside of the fringe, go to the fringe and start making up their own rules, of course. I mean, rules are important. But I often think that, especially in the customer service environment and in the practice management, rules hinder the ability of practices delivering exceptional service. If you think about any time that, and this has to be, by the way, this has to be baked into the culture. And this is how if you go to these organizations that are really cool, you'll notice that the staff is highly empowered. So just the other day, like 2 years ago, my daughter's iPod broke. It had a little thing here where she yanked it out and then broke the little pins inside. So we took it to the Apple store, and in the policy says that if to replace it, I think it's like, or not to replace it, but to fix it, I think it's like $90. No matter what, they charge you for the thing. Well, guess what? They gave us a new one. At the moment, they just said, hey, this is cool. No problem. We'll fix it. Here's a new one. Normally it's $90, but this is what we're going to do today. And I thought that was, unbelievable. The policy said charge $90, but the employee had the power to deliver exceptional service. Now, did it do good for Apple? Would they have been out $90? I mean, in some circumstances, if you have an abuser, then yeah, that $90 is absolutely merited. You have to charge it. But for little girl, 10 years old, broke her iPod. She loves it. She wants to keep on using it. She just could not believe that they gave. And I told her, they gave you a new one.
She's going to buy 10 more over the next 20 years.
Exactly. So I think that if we focus on adding these values, what is the value doing? What's the best interest for the patient? What's the best interest for the practice? What's the best interest for the employees? Then I think that that's a good way for them to decide. And I tell them all the time, it's like, hey, this patient has a balance. We've sent them a few letters. What should we do? And I'm like, well, what do you think? What do you think is the best thing that we should do? Understanding of our values. And sometimes they'll say, we need to collect it. We need to put them to send them to collection. And other times it's like, let's give them a break. Let's give them a break. Let's call them. Let's do the thing. It's an unusual situation, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, we haven't gotten to my discussion. I think we should jump to the next, which is fostering this culture. We kind of laid out on why the culture is important, how that culture enables us to deliver exceptional service. So now I want to get into a little bit about what are some of the things that, for example, that we've been doing to kind of set the stage for the culture to flourish in our practice. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think your comments about the rules are excellent. I think too many people create rules that are based on like finding the negative exceptions. They make a huge rule set trying to keep these very rare or even occasional things from happening, and in doing so, they kill the ability to make a lot of positive things happen.
Yeah.
People make a lot of rules out of fear, as opposed to a lot of rules based on encouragement. And I'm fortunate to work for a place that tends not to make a lot of rules, and I see the benefit of it every day. In any event, you're absolutely right. What I wanted to hear from you about, which is a topic that interests me greatly, is this concept of what we would call personality assessment tests or character assessment tests, and how they relate to finding employees for your practice. So I know that's something you do. I want you to tell us about it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think on how this kind of came about, and I think it was several things came into play, but basically the essence of it is that in order for us, this has a lot of play into it, not just simply the culture aspect of it, but also in positioning people so they can work in their best environment. So if we know what the people's strengths are, then we can place them in their strength, and then that person will do far better than they would otherwise. And if you are into sports, you know that you don't want to have the pitcher, the guy that has a strength pitching, having any other position other than the pitching position, or the catcher, or anything else. So this is kind of the same way. And I think that in practices, oftentimes we just need a body, so we put that person there. And this happens in all organizations. We need a body, and we need this person, as opposed to understand what this person is really good at, and then find a job for them. So what we've done is, I said, well, how do I go about doing this to figure out what our strengths are? So I decided to go about, and I know it's not like I discovered this. I know organizations do this all the time, but we started doing these profile assessment tests, character assessment tests, where essentially, if anybody's familiar with the Myers-Briggs, there's one that we use called the DISC, the D-I-S-C, where it asks you all these personality questions, no right or wrong questions, where they say, would you rather read a book or go outside skiing? Would you rather do this or that? And you kind of, or they give you a circumstance, a situation, and then how would you react? And then they'll give you 4 or 5 different things. And then they, of course, they have some, I don't know, social algorithm or something like that they apply to it, and then they decide where people fall under these certain things. Now, certainly, they're very careful that you don't necessarily fall into a box. That's not what this is for. Is they highlight what are some of the trends, what are your strong points, not necessarily trends. What's the word I'm looking for? What are the behavior patterns that you normally exhibit under certain circumstances? So I know that for the viewers, this will be okay, but for the people that are listening to the podcast, it won't be any good. But basically what I'm showing here is our DISC profile, and the DISC, each letter stands for something. So the D is for, I don't even remember what it is. I think it's like dominance, support, accuracy. Each one of those things stand for something. And if you can see, Chip, there's these dots that are on this graph, and then that's where we fall under each. That's where we fall under which are predominant characteristic traits. And the 10 of us are there, so we see what we're really strong at, and we see what we're not that strong at. So here's what I use this for. Now we're hiring people, and I want people to fit very well into our culture. Not only do I want somebody that fits very into our culture, I also want people that have certain strengths. So by doing that, we have an assessment that basically looks at all of us and sees what our strengths are as a practice. So the idea is that I need somebody that's a little bit more hard-nosed, that is a little bit more perfectionist. Then it's really easy for me to do this test, identify what their strengths are, and then I know where they're going to fit. The other cool thing is that my staff also knows how they fit and why they're being brought in. Because sometimes you bring somebody in and that person is a perfectionist. Well, the rest of us, let's say we're not perfectionists. And so there's all this clash, which hinders our culture. But now we're like, hey, we're bringing in somebody here that is a tough person. They're really good with creating rules. They're really good. But the other ones are a little bit like, oh, we'll see how it goes. But then now that kind of lets our guard down because we know the purpose of why we're bringing this person in. They know their strengths, and then we also share our culture with them to say, hey, listen, is this a culture where you can thrive in? Because the likelihood that you're going to clash with us is very likely because you are an opposite side of character. However, if we understand this and know what our strengths are, then we can kind of go towards the same goal. So that's what we have been doing to kind of not only position people in the right place, but also in helping us understand who we are individually and how we can take some of those strengths and also even acknowledge our weaknesses to say, you know what, you're not that great. You tend to get overwhelmed with certain, I'm not saying go directly to that person like that, but if you have somebody that's easily overwhelmed and then maybe snaps back at somebody, then we know, well, this person gets easily overwhelmed, and then so we'll have to bring somebody in that has the more of the calming character, the one that says, don't worry. It's just we bring that person in to help that person get through the challenges, and then all of us, all of this, really what it is to create a culture of collaboration, of cohesion, of strength and weaknesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's basically in a nutshell what we've been doing and kind of what we've been trying to achieve with this with these personality assessment tests.
Well, it's interesting. You brought up the baseball analogy at the beginning, and there's a book called, I believe, Management by Baseball by Jeff Angus, and it won like one of the best business books of the year awards a couple years ago, and it essentially talks about how it was just, it was like you wrote the introduction for it and what you mentioned, how a lot of the times you look at your billing staff and you lose someone, so you just got to fill a body, you put them in there, and the management by baseball concept is like that. Look, not everybody is good at everything. You don't, if you're a baseball manager, you don't grab someone from your pitching staff to become your first baseman. They don't fit. And there are a lot of things that you can do that once you recognize what people are good at, you don't have to waste a lot of time fitting the wrong person into the slot that you're looking for. It's a pretty quick read. I do recommend it. It's on my bookshelf. I'll send it to you, Brandon, if I haven't.
I think you did already. I read it.
Oh, well, there you go.
You sent it to me a while back. I might have not read the whole thing, but I am almost sure that I've read it.
Yeah, and so I'm wondering if we can get the speaker for our users conference. I'll think about that. All right, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about on the video before we slide into the full podcast piece, and that I'm going to make this really brief. I'll talk about it more on the podcast side. When it comes to change management, I think that's a key part to making your culture successful. It's one thing to wake up today, come into your practice and say, I really don't like the way that our front desk treats its patients, or I have trouble with the process that we're following to collect overdue balances because we're really bad at this or we're good at that, or I don't like the way that we assign job tasks in the office, or the way that the nurses talk to me, or any aspect of culture that's important. One of the things that I see a lot of practices do, one of the big mistakes that a lot of practices make, is that they try to do too much at once and then therefore are not consistent with what they're trying to do. When you're trying to make a big change in your practice, whether it's to your culture or you're adding an EHR, I mean something we've talked about, or you've added a billing service, or you're taking a billing service away. I'm talking about some big things, but it could be something small. We're now going to check eligibility at our front desk every day. When you want to make a change to that culture, change to the flow in your office, one of the things I see practices do is they walk in, they say, as starting tomorrow, we're going to check the eligibility of every single patient who walks in the door today. And then the staff fights it because it's human nature, and so many practices, after the staff dragging their feet for 2 weeks, bail. They give up on it. They're like, oh, it didn't work. And if you really want to make a meaningful change to your culture, you have to commit to testing the change at the very least for a long period of time. You have to say, we are going to check the eligibility of every patient for 3 months before we assess whether or not that process is worthwhile. You have to commit to doing it so realistically that you get past that first round of whining and change fear and everything like that, so that it becomes part of the daily routine. And then 3 months, 6 months, whatever the change requires, you can say, all right, let's assessment. Is this change worthwhile? Or should we continue doing this but in a slightly different way? We had too often a change to the practice is derailed by simply the fear of change, and you have to institute something sometimes by force long enough to get past that fear, and then it become part of what your daily routine is, and then you can assess it. I hope that makes some sense.
No, absolutely. I do understand what you're saying, and that is actually really good with my personality style because I'm tend to be very flexible in many things. One of my strengths is the flexibility aspect of it. So when we implement things, and this is just by chance, just because this is the way I'm wired, not because of anything in particular. But when we go implement things, it's just like, well, let's just give it a try. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Where some of the personality traits, it's just like, no, we have to do it. Now, sometimes I do need somebody to be stronger and not so flexible because then they were like, no, Brandon, this is important. We need to do it now. But when we implement things, we're just like, hey, let's just try it out. Let's see how it works. The important thing about that is explaining why. So eligibility is just not simply the eligibility. It's just like, listen, let me show you all the balances that we've had as a result, and let me show you how much work it's required after the fact of trying to get somebody on the phone so they can give it the proper insurance number, blah, 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 and then the person's like, oh, okay, so we're not just doing this because all of a sudden you woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
Really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I see too many times, you're totally correct, where the word comes from on high that we're going to do X without a proper explanation, especially without even a simple explanation of this is why it's going to benefit you in the long run. It might be a little bit more work to check eligibility, but guess what? It's going to save us billing time, it's going to save us collection time, and that's how we as a team succeed.
Yeah.
So I think that's key. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end our video cast, but we're going to keep talking. For those of you who want to are on the podcast, you're going to hear the rest of this. So, all right, we'll see you soon, and good luck. And if you have any comments about practice culture, get in touch. You hit the Google Plus page or send us email. And now we're on to the podcast. So.